Lena Morgan's hands trembled as she stared at the hastily scrawled note on her kitchen counter. I'm done with you and this dead-end life. The house is already on the market. Take whatever's left and don't contact me. The words, written in her husband Eric's familiar handwriting, hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, the world around her seemed to freeze. Her modern loft apartment, the scent of freshly brewed coffee still lingering in the air, the soft hum of morning traffic from the streets of Chicago below. She had always imagined betrayal would come with shouting, dramatic confrontations, maybe even tears. Instead, it arrived in the form of a cold, dismissive note, discarded like an afterthought. But as shock and hurt surged through her, another feeling rose, one she hadn't expected. Relief. 12 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. In some ways, it wasn't a surprise. The signs had been there for months, maybe even years. The distant conversations, the unexplained business trips, the quiet resentment in Eric's eyes whenever she talked about her boutique success. She had tried to ignore it, convincing herself that they were just going through a rough patch, but deep down she had known the truth. Eric was a man who thrived on control, and the moment she stopped needing his validation, the cracks in their relationship had become impossible to ignore. He used to be supportive, back when she was just dreaming of launching her fashion brand. He had even helped her secure a lease for her first shop. But as she gained recognition, built a loyal customer base, and expanded her business beyond what he thought was possible, his encouragement turned into resentment. He dismissed her achievements, calling her work a cute little side project, while he handled the so-called real finances of the household. She should have been devastated by his sudden departure, but instead something inside her shifted. Eric thought he had the upper hand, that she would be left scrambling, powerless without him. What he didn't know was that Lena had been preparing for this moment for months. The late-night phone calls, the missing funds from their joint accounts, she had noticed, and she had acted. Quietly, methodically, she had built her own financial security, shifting her savings to a separate account, securing legal advice, and, most importantly, refinancing the loft under her own name, while Eric was too distracted by his real estate investments to notice. Now, as she read the cruel words on the paper again, the weight of fear and uncertainty began to lift. He thought he was leaving her helpless. Instead, he had just set her free. Lena exhaled slowly, picked up the note, and crumpled it in her fist before tossing it into the trash. She pulled out her phone and typed a simple response. Saw your note, thanks for the heads up. Then, with a steadying breath, she walked to her office, powered on her laptop, and got to work. If Eric wanted to play games, he was about to learn that she had been preparing for this battle far longer than he ever realized. The more Lena thought about it, the more she realized that Eric's betrayal hadn't started with the note. It had been unraveling right in front of her for months, maybe even years. The warning signs had been there, subtle at first, easy to dismiss as paranoia or overthinking. The late nights he claimed to be working on major deals, that never seemed to materialize the way he always tilted his phone screen away when she walked into the room. The business trips that conveniently lined up with luxury hotel charges on their joint credit card. But the real moment of realization had come 6 months ago, when she noticed something disturbing while paying their household bills. Large sums of money were being withdrawn from their joint account, amounts too substantial to be simple investments or routine expenses. When she casually asked Eric about it, he waved it off with a confident smirk. It's just temporary, he had assured her. I'm working on a high-return investment. Something in his tone told her he wasn't expecting her to question him further. That was his first mistake. Lena didn't let it go. She started digging, keeping quiet while gathering evidence piece by piece. She combed through bank statements, noting every unexplained transfer. She paid closer attention to Eric's behavior, his insistence on handling all the real finances, despite the fact that she ran a successful business herself. The way he snapped at her whenever she asked about their long-term financial plans. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. Eric wasn't investing. He was siphoning money. Where it was going, she wasn't entirely sure yet, but one thing was obvious. He was preparing for an exit, and he expected to leave her blindsided. That was when she knew she had to act. With quiet determination, she took control of her own finances. She opened a separate bank account and transferred all of her boutique's profits there. She had worked too hard to let Eric gamble away the life she'd built. Then came the house, their stunning loft in the heart of Chicago, a place she had poured her heart into designing. During a recent renovation, she had taken Eric's growing indifference as an opportunity. He had been too busy schmoozing his real estate contacts to attend the refinancing meeting at the bank, so he had casually signed over power of attorney to her, trusting her to handle the paperwork. He never even read the documents. He had no idea that, as of that moment, the home they shared was solely in her name. And now, standing in that very home, holding his pathetic goodbye note, Lena felt nothing but satisfaction. He had believed she would be helpless, that she would beg him to come back. Instead, she had been preparing for the storm long before it arrived. The game he thought he was playing alone, she had been playing it longer, and she was about to win. Lena didn't have to wait long for Eric's plan to start falling apart. The morning after she found his note, her phone buzzed with an email from Marcus, a well-known real estate agent in Chicago. Subject: URG, house sale documentation required. The message was polite but direct. Eric had listed their loft for sale and was pushing for a quick transaction. However, there was a problem. He couldn't finalize the deal without her signature. Lena smirked as she read the email, sipping her coffee as if it were just another ordinary morning. Eric, so sure of his control over everything, had been too careless to realize he no longer had the authority to sell the home. His arrogance had blinded him to the details, and now it was coming back to bite him. She immediately called Marcus. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," she said, keeping her voice calm and professional. "I never authorized this sale, and Eric doesn't have the legal right to move forward without my approval." There was an awkward pause before Marcus cleared his throat. "I see. Well, that certainly changes things." Lena could hear the discomfort in his voice. He had likely already promised potential buyers that the deal would go through without a hitch. Eric had probably walked into his office, brimming with confidence, acting as if he had everything under control. But now his carefully laid plans were crumbling. Because the one thing he hadn't accounted for was Lena knowing her own power. Not even 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed again, this time a furious text from Eric. "Eric, what the hell are you doing? Marcus says there's a problem with the house sale." "Eric, stop playing games and sign the papers. I'll give you 24 hours to pack your stuff and leave." Lena exhaled slowly, shaking her head. The audacity. Even now, after trying to discard her like an afterthought, he still thought he was calling the shots. She didn't bother responding. Instead, she forwarded his messages to Naomi, her best friend and attorney, who had been preparing for this exact moment. Within minutes, Naomi called back. "It's time," she said simply. What Eric didn't know was that Lena and Naomi had been building an airtight legal case against him for months. Lena had documented every suspicious transaction, every unexplained withdrawal, every piece of evidence pointing to financial misconduct. Naomi had been quietly filing paperwork, freezing joint accounts, and securing legal protections. The moment Eric attempted to finalize the house sale, their counterattack had already been triggered. That afternoon, Lena received confirmation that their joint accounts had been officially frozen. Any money Eric had been planning to take with him, gone. His so-called investments, locked up in a legal battle. The man who thought he could walk away with everything was about to lose more than he ever expected. Meanwhile, Eric was growing increasingly desperate. His texts escalated from angry demands to pathetic attempts at negotiation. "Eric, can we at least talk about this?" "Eric, you're blowing this way out of proportion." "Eric, Lena, be reasonable." She ignored them all. Eric had spent years underestimating her, dismissing her, controlling her. But now, he was the one spiraling, and she was the one holding all the cards. With a deep breath, Lena sat back in her chair, a sense of satisfaction settling over her. The power shift was happening. And Eric, he was about to learn just how much he had miscalculated. The doorbell rang just as Lena was finalizing a new collection design for her boutique. She didn't have to check to know who it was. Eric. He had always been predictable when things didn't go his way. First anger, then manipulation, then desperation. Taking a steadying breath, she walked to the door, pausing just long enough to steel herself before opening it. There he was, standing on the porch, his face flushed with frustration, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. "What the hell did you do, Lena?" he demanded, stepping inside without an invitation. "Marcus just told me the house sale can't go through. He said, there's a problem with the paperwork. That doesn't make sense. I handled all of this." Lena let the door click shut behind her, arms crossed as she leaned casually against the wall. "Oh, you handled it?" she asked, feigning curiosity. Like, you handled our joint accounts? Or like, you handled the money you siphoned away thinking I wouldn't notice? Eric's expression flickered, just for a second, but she caught it. That tiny moment of uncertainty, of realization that she knew more than he had counted on. He straightened his tie, trying to regain control of the situation. "You're being ridiculous," he scoffed. "I made some financial decisions to secure our future. You just don't understand how these things work." Lena smiled, not the kind of smile he was used to, not the soft, appeasing one she used to wear whenever he belittled her in front of their friends. No, this was something new, something sharp. "Oh, I understand perfectly, Eric. I understand that you've been draining our accounts for months. I understand that you thought you could sell this house out from under me. And I understand that you never expected me to be smart enough to fight back." She walked to her desk, pulling out a thick folder. The moment she laid it on the table, Eric's face paled. What is this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Evidence," she said simply, flipping it open. "Bank statements, transaction records, emails you so carelessly left open on our shared iPad. Even a report from a private investigator. Turns out those business trips were more like expensive weekends in Vegas." His jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, staring at the damning paperwork spread out before him. Then the final blow. Lena turned to him, voice even, steady. "And in case you're wondering about the house," she pulled out one last document. "The refinancing agreement. It's in my name, solely mine. You signed over your rights without even reading the paperwork." Eric's arrogance crumbled. He sat down heavily on the couch, rubbing a hand over his face. You, you can't do this to me." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Oh, but I already have." At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Naomi, right on schedule, armed with every legal document they needed to make sure Eric had nothing left to take. Eric swallowed hard as realization set in. The game was over, and Lena had won. Lena watched through the window as Eric slumped onto the steps outside, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice rising in panic. She didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was happening. His bank had just informed him that their joint accounts were frozen. His so-called investments were now under legal scrutiny. He was learning, far too late, that he no longer had control over anything. Naomi stood beside Lena, arms crossed, watching with a satisfied smirk. "He's unraveling," she said. "Exactly as we predicted," Lena nodded, feeling a quiet sense of victory. But not because she had ruined Eric. No, he had done that all by himself. She had simply protected herself in a game he never expected her to win. Over the next few weeks, the legal process moved quickly. Naomi had compiled a rock-solid case proving financial misconduct, unauthorized withdrawals, and even fraudulent business dealings. Eric had siphoned money from their joint accounts to fund risky investments and gambling sprees in Vegas. Worse still, he had attempted to conceal assets in offshore accounts, which only made things worse when the courts got involved. The judge ruled in Lena's favor almost immediately, forcing Eric to repay every stolen dollar. But money wasn't the only thing he lost. The fallout from his deception spread through his professional life like wildfire. His brokerage firm, once eager to praise his success, cut ties with him the moment legal action was filed. Clients pulled their investments, leaving him financially stranded. The real estate world was small, and word spread quickly about his failed attempt to manipulate his own wife. The arrogance that had once made him so confident now made him toxic in his industry. Meanwhile, Lena was thriving. With Eric out of her life, she poured her energy into her boutique, which had already been gaining momentum before his departure. Without his constant criticism and dismissive attitude, she felt lighter, freer, and more creative than she had in years. Orders flooded in, and soon her business was not just surviving, it was expanding. A major fashion magazine reached out for a feature, highlighting her journey as an entrepreneur. Her home, the loft Eric had tried to sell from under her, became a sanctuary of renewal. She redecorated room by room, removing every trace of him. The walls, once painted neutral tones at Eric's insistence, were now rich with colors Lena had always loved. She transformed his old office into a studio space for designing new collections. She even finally bought the vintage sewing machine she had dreamed of for years, a small but powerful symbol of reclaiming her own dreams. One evening, as she was closing up the boutique, she received an unexpected email from Marcus, the real estate agent. "Apologies for everything regarding Eric," he wrote. "On a different note, my wife is a big fan of your designs. I'd love to surprise her with something custom for our anniversary. Let me know if you're interested." Lena chuckled at the irony. The same man who had once tried to help Eric take everything from her was now reaching out to support her business. It was proof of how much the tables had turned. Eric, on the other hand, was struggling to rebuild his life. A few months after the divorce was finalized, Lena received a message from his sister, informing her that he was living in a small rental apartment, drowning in debt. She had half expected a final, desperate plea from him, but none came. And even if it had, she wouldn't have answered. She had already won, and she had no reason to look back. 6 months after Eric walked out of her life, Lena stood in the middle of her boutique, surrounded by racks of carefully curated designs, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The store was thriving, her online sales had tripled, and she had just signed a contract with a high-end fashion retailer to feature her collection. The business that Eric had once dismissed as a little hobby was now not only her livelihood, but a symbol of her resilience. She had built something lasting, something powerful, something that was entirely hers. Her home had undergone a transformation as well. Gone were the cold, minimalist decorations Eric had insisted on. In their place were warm, vibrant colors, handcrafted furniture, and art from local designers she admired. She had even converted the second bedroom into a design studio, a space that was purely her own. Every brushstroke of paint, every carefully placed decoration felt like an act of reclaiming herself. This was her home now, not just a place to live, but a reflection of her true self. One evening, at the urging of Naomi and her sister Brianna, Lena attended a networking event for small business owners. It was the first time she had stepped into a crowded social space since the divorce, and for a brief moment she almost backed out. But then she caught her own reflection in a mirror, standing taller, more confident, wearing a dress she had designed herself, and realized just how much she had changed. At the event, she met Daniel, a photographer and artisan who specialized in handcrafted wooden jewelry boxes. Unlike Eric, he didn't dismiss her work or make her feel small. He listened, asked thoughtful questions, and even admired the details of her designs with genuine appreciation. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was a reminder that there were people out there who saw her for who she truly was, not as someone to control or diminish. One afternoon, while organizing her office, she stumbled upon Eric's old farewell note, crumpled in the back of a drawer. As she read the words again, "I'm done with you and this dead-end life," she didn't feel anger or sadness. Instead, she laughed. He had been right about one thing: that old version of herself, the woman who doubted her worth, who waited for validation, who shrank herself to fit into his world, was gone. She had built a new life, one that was brighter, bolder, and entirely her own. And she was just getting started. The story of Lena's transformation teaches a powerful lesson about self worth, resilience, and the importance of financial and emotional independence. Throughout her marriage, Lena allowed herself to be diminished, constantly doubting her own success because of Eric's dismissive attitude. However, when betrayal forced her to face reality, she discovered a strength she never knew she had. One of the biggest takeaways is the importance of preparation and awareness. Instead of being blindsided by Eric's deception, Lena trusted her instincts, gathered evidence, and protected herself financially. Her ability to think ahead allowed her to take control of the situation rather than become a victim of it. This proves that knowledge and foresight can turn even the most difficult circumstances into an opportunity for empowerment. Additionally, Lena's journey emphasizes the idea that true success comes when you stop seeking validation from others. Once she let go of Eric's influence, she flourished, both in her business and in her personal life. The moment she stopped shrinking herself to fit someone else's expectations, she became unstoppable. Ultimately, the story reminds us that sometimes the hardest endings lead to the most incredible new beginnings if we have the courage to embrace them.